Hi, I'm Lynn Coffin, and I'm going to be reading from my just published novel, The Aftermath. This is the prologue. It's called The Thing That Happened. It was New Year's Eve. 1999 was about to become 2000, but the Hotel Kerrigan was deserted. The only thing moving in the lobby was the tinsel on the artificial Christmas tree. The manager had left hours ago, muttering darkly about bankruptcy. Cafe Kerrigan was empty and officially closed. The other waitress had left a little early, saying she really wanted to be with her family. Susan was putting new salt in old shakers. Since childhood, there had never been anything she really wanted. There was something wrong with that, she thought. A man paused in the doorway, then stepped from the lobby into the cafe. He was wearing a plaid sports coat and jeans. He was carrying white roses, holding them away from his body with a kind of loving mistrust, as one might carry a baby without a diaper. He stood just inside the door and smiled at her. When she got closer, he apologized. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said. His smile was boyish. His teeth were straight. He seemed sober. "If you don't mind, I'd like to give you these flowers." "Why?" Susan said. Then she remembered her New Year's resolution to be more trusting and corrected herself. "I mean, thank you," she said. "They're very nice and very unexpected." The man laughed. "My date stood me up," he said, handing her the flowers. They had not really been arranged, but were thrust together in a bunch, wrapped with newspaper. She cradled them in her arms. "If I were a painter," the man said, "I'd do a painting called Young Woman with Flowers. The flowers would be roses like these. The woman would look like you, with big almond eyes and dark wisps of hair corkscrewing down in front of her ears, no matter how she tried to pull them back." "Thank you again, but we're still closed," Susan said, resisting the impulse to touch her hair. "Even if you have given me these lovely roses, the sign is right there." "I'm sorry," he said. "I guess when I'm hungry, I go a little blind." Susan considered him. He was too ill at ease and rueful to be threatening. He seemed to exude good intentions. His hapless expression was endearing. Her New Year's resolution was to trust people more, especially men. There was a moment of awkward silence, like the weedy strip between rail yard tracks. She lost her place. "I'm sorry," she said. "Did you say something?" He squinched his mouth together. "Is there anything at all you could give me to eat?" "Well," Susan said, "the cook is still back there. I could probably get one last meal out of him if you're really hungry." "I'm famished." "It would have to be something standard, like scrambled eggs and coffee." "Scrambled eggs would be perfect," he said. "I don't need anything to drink, not even water." Susan went out to the kitchen and saw Joe sleeping in the alcove. He was snoring like a buzzsaw. Susan found a plastic vase stuck behind a pile of sizzler platters and put the flowers in that. Let sleeping cooks lie. She made scrambled eggs and toast and went back out into the cafe. She put the plate down. "Happy New Year," she said. "Would you sit with me? Are you old enough for me to buy you a drink?" "I'm 22, but we don't sell drinks. Even if we did, we really are closed, I'm afraid." The man stood and extended his hand. "I should have introduced myself. I'm Tat. I'm an instantaneous translator, an IT guy." "Tat?" The phrase "tit for tat" vaulted unbidden into Susan's mind. It had been a long and unexciting day. Her imagination was threatening to go into overdrive. Well, Tat, I'm Susan, a waitress. I'm not sure what an instantaneous translator is. How do you do, Susan? Forget the job title, please. I was just trying to impress you. Not that being a translator is well, whatever. Sorry, as for my name, I know it's a little odd. Never mind. Please accept this in satisfaction of my debt to you. Tat inserted his thumb and index finger into the breast pocket of his sport coat and handed her a crisp $50 bill. Susan looked at the bill in her hand. Don't you have anything smaller? Fortunately, I don't. Tat sat down again, speared eggs with his fork, and stuck them in his mouth. Susan waited a moment while he finished chewing. I have no way of giving you change, she said. Tat smiled up at her. I have no reason to expect any. Susan put the $50 in her uniform skirt pocket. Thank you, she said. You're more than welcome, so could I persuade you please come across the way to the hotel bar for just one drink with a Georgian homeboy? I don't know you, Susan said. Right, Tat said, and I don't want to pressure you. But if you could, just this one time, take pity on a stranger, alone on New Year's Eve, in a lonely city by a lonely lake. I mean, the bar is, 50 feet away, right here in the hotel. It would be a real act of kindness on your part. He spoke between bites of food. His tone conveyed no belief whatsoever in the possibility of anything's happening. He sounded completely harmless, sure that he would fail. He epitomized the word feckless. All right, said Susan, just one very short, quick, symbolic drink. They went into the small hotel bar. Bruce, the normal bartender, wasn't there. I'm just a part-time fill-in, the new guy told them. There was some kind of party going on at the end of the room, so they took a table near the front. Tat ordered a bottle of champagne, pretzels and potato chips for him, cheddar cheese goldfish for her. The bartender brought these to the table, and Tat popped the champagne cork. It went all the way to the ceiling and made a little mark. Susan offered her empty glass to Tat, who said it looked spotty. He took both their glasses and the champagne bottle back to the bar. The bartender slid 2 new glasses off the ceiling rack and wiped them with a white towel. Across the narrow room, Tat asked Susan if she'd like a sugar cube in her champagne. Susan said she didn't think so. Oh, come on, Tat said. Somebody told me that was the Michigan way. You're only supposed to do that if the champagne is cheap or sour or something, Susan said. Tat nodded. The bartender poured champagne into both glasses, and Tat tried a little sip of one. Then he frowned and nodded. I'm sorry, he said, but I'm afraid this qualifies under both counts. Besides, it's funner and fizzier with sugar. Watch. He dropped a cube into each of the glasses and grinned at her when they both foamed over. Tat came back to the table with a full glass in each hand, the bottle under his arm. He proposed a toast to the new year. He seemed a little nervous. He drained his glass and encouraged Susan to do the same. They drank. Tat poured both of them more champagne. It didn't foam over this time. Tat made a little speech about what it was like to be a Georgian homeboy and have people feel they were superior to you just because they spoke clearer or faster. This is really strong champagne, Susan said. Thank you, but I really should be going. Tat was pouring more champagne. She seemed to be in a moving car, and it was hard to see through the glass. The party had gotten smaller. The bartender had disappeared. It's those cheddar cheese fish, a man's voice said slowly. They make everything taste weird. She could almost see the fish dissolving as they swam. A big silver ball moved slowly down a spike high above Times Square, where she first thought it was raining because everything looked blurry. Then she realized she was standing still but moving. She was moving through time as if in a parade. People were lining the streets. They were cheering, but they didn't make a sound. She was in the elevator. The operator was out of uniform and out of focus. His wrists stuck out. There was a fireplace in the upper room they reached. There was wood in the fireplace, and the wood was already burning. How had that happened? There was a mattress on the floor. Did she need to use the bathroom? No, she could hold it. She sat on the mattress. Exhaustion washed over her like a wave. They were at war. They were in a bunker. She'd been in a bunker her whole life. Someone would have to pay. Where was her purse? There it was. There were pillows everywhere, like clouds shot out of the sky. Someone was tugging off her clothing. She was a child again. It was time for the whispering and closets with coats overhead. She needed to do what she shouldn't, because she had to. Still, in the middle pillows, there was something waiting, something like terror. And the terror was like lightning, and by the light of the lightning she could see she was naked, and she was the only one. The switch confused her. She wondered about the champagne. There had been salty champagne. No wonder she was thirsty. A voice said, "Lie down on the wood." She was in a boat now, sailing out to sea. She was not in control. No one was in control. The water knew what it was doing. The boat was sinking. Salt water was pouring in, flooding her. There was no room for anything personal. Wingless angels were dancing, dancing on pins and needles. Pins and needles. Sharp, sharp. A country had its legs open, forced into yawning. Someone was bent. Fingers were scrabbling in hair she didn't have. A plane high overhead droned like a voice. It was noise. It meant nothing. It would feel good. What would happen would not hurt, though birds dangled from the sky like coats. Back and front, dry fans whirring, helicopters on their way. Somewhere there was a desk she needed to get under. There it was. A plastic nightstick poked its head between metal teeth. She was alone in a house at night. Men were at the back door, and she ran with the children to the kitchen, and they pushed back, all of them, pushed against the door, digging in their heels, and even as they felt the door give way behind them, they heard the front door open. If there was someone in charge, it wasn't someone you could reach. When it came to it, you had to let go, forgetting what came next. Small animals ran for cover on a stubbled field. It was open season in a storm. There were shots. Animals were pushing at her, hard-nosings over and over. They would bite her if she didn't play dead. The animals were blind and wet, and teeth and fur and hands and mouths and things too fierce to mention. If they bit her, she would not feel it. She would not feel it. The animals had gone. There was just a bristling field where storms happened. There was an eye that closed. And the animals pushed back, coming at the tree from hot, sticking, dry, muddy front back, double entrances in trouble of earth, stabbed by forked tongues and lightning, and pain rounded Spain and ran zigzag in all the dark directions, anywhere it wanted, anywhere at all. Pain, 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 pain. Chapter 1. Riding a Strange Horse. I stood, pulling myself up on a beam of sunlight, using it like a handrail. There was a door in my head, and someone was trying to knock it down. Bam, bam, bam. I hurt. I was wearing my gold uniform top, but I had buttoned it wrong. I left rebuttoning for later. The misbuttoning went with the jeans being too long. I rolled them up and up. I had big flannel cuffs now. The flannel was red, with big whiplashes of green and black across it. It looked hot and cold at once. I needed to get home. Where was my skirt? They made you pay for the uniforms. There was a $50 bill face up on the floor beside a small black cloth purse. I hurt at the root of me. I checked. The purse was mine. I recognized my picture on the driver's license. I was squinting. I tried to put the $50 in the purse. It must have fallen out. Money belonged in a purse. I belonged at home in a place I wasn't living anymore. The purse didn't want to open it, but I made it. I put the money where it was safe. The purse didn't want to close, but it did. What had happened? No, that way was blocked. How had I gotten here? That could be figured out. I worked at the hotel, but employees weren't supposed to go to guest rooms. I could be fired. I didn't need the job, but it wasn't like me to go directly against the rules. But there had been a man. Champagne. I heard my mother's voice. "Don't look back," she was saying. People who look back turn to pillars of salt. I was a woman unencumbered by a past. Last night was as far from me as the dark side of the moon. It was safer that way. Forgive and forget, my mother had instructed me. But all you had to do was forget, and the forgiveness took care of itself. There were bed covers mounted up on one side of the mattress. If there was someone under them, the someone wasn't moving. I hesitated, then pulled off the covers. Nothing. My head was knocking again, more like pounding. There was a real someone knocking. They were at the room door. I needed them to go away. I needed them to go away so I could go away. I walked to the door over a floor that tilted. I remembered to put the chain on. Then I opened the door. A man in white was standing in the hall. He looked familiar. "Do you need a doctor?" he asked. "Do I look that bad?" I said. Jokes were good. If you could joke, people thought you were okay. People would let you go. The man in the white coat laughed, showing his teeth. I closed the door a little farther. Some tall guy was going down in the elevator when I was coming up for a delivery. He said there was a woman in here who needed a doctor. I tried to focus. I felt dizzy. The power of suggestion. Someone had given up on the door in my head. They were banging on an anvil now. "Are you a doctor?" The man in white laughed again, loudly. "No, ma'am," he said. He was really only a boy. I thought for a minute of just closing the door, but no, then he would call someone. They would batter down the door. They would break the chain. "I thought you were a doctor," I admitted. "You're dressed in white, and you said you were here for a delivery." "That's true," he said, and laughed again, but now it seemed to me his laughter was forced. I'd let the conversation go on too long. He was darting glances past me into the room. "I'm just delivering a pizza." He opened the box as if in proof. The pizza looked too big for the box. It was pockmarked with pepperoni. "Nobody ordered this," I said. "Do you want it anyway?" "No." "Do you want me to call a doctor?" "No." He cocked his head. I must have spoken too loudly. He looked as though he suspected something. "I'm the only one here," I said, "and I don't need anybody else. I just need to go home." I half expected him to tell me to wait where I was. "Okay," he said cheerfully, "just call across the street if you need a pizza or anything. I'll make it hot." "I will," I said, "thank you." I closed the door on his smile and chained it. I counted to 20 and opened the door on the chain as quietly as I could. I half expected him not to have moved, but he was gone. I found my shoes and put them on. I opened the door and I stepped out into the corridor and I closed the door behind me. And I walked down the corridor and I pushed the elevator button. It came and the doors opened, and I rode down to the ground floor, and I walked through the lobby on thick crimson. I was glad I recognized the lobby. It looked like a stage set with ornate, overstuffed chairs no one ever sat in, and gilt-edged books no one ever read because their pages had been glued together. I was the only person going anywhere. I remembered to turn left to go outside, and I pushed the big glass circle door around like a clock until I was outside in a world newly lit by sparkling snow, walking back to my apartment. The world had changed along with the year. I was happy to be going home, even to an apartment I didn't really have anymore. Everything I owned was in boxes. I would have a home later today, which is what tomorrow had turned into. I would have a home with David and Raitlin. I was tired and the sidewalk was slippery. All the trees and bushes had turned white. The snow that was still falling was an afterthought, an unnecessary extravagance. Mine were the first footprints in the snow, though it must be late in the morning since the sun was high over the trees. "Don't drink till the sun is over the yardarm," my father's favorite laughless joke. Why was I thinking about my father? I'd had too much to drink last night. I'd had a hangover to beat all hangovers. The stiff fabric of the jeans rolled against my skin in the place where my legs came together. It was like a dry blue tongue. It hurt, but thinking about where you hurt just made the hurt worse, and there was nothing to be done about it anyway. I started to fall, but caught myself. I cursed myself for drinking whatever it had been. Champagne, probably. They should call champagne the Midas drink. But if a drink turned everything to gold, you'd die pretty quick. I had christened a ship with champagne once. It wasn't a real ship, just a little tugboat or something, which was why they asked a high school kid to do a woman's job. I'd been picked because someone felt sorry for me. They told me it would be very bad luck if the champagne bottle didn't break on the first swing. I was passing some of those trees that looked down instead of up. What did they call those? Weeping, that was it. They looked like women with long hair and long arms and long legs. Marionette dancers with their strings cut. Old dancers, their hair had turned white. My feet were cold. My body ached with a vengeance. Juneau Street was taking a long time. What had I been thinking about? Oh yes, the christening champagne bottle had been wrapped in ribbons, red, white, and blue. I cocked my arm sideways and gave it my best shot. The bottle exploded. Afterward they said it was a special bottle, filed down all around the inside to make the green glass walls especially thin, to avoid bad luck. They told me, too, there was a crowd of sailors one floor down under the party, under the christening party, and at the very moment someone gave me the signal and I swung, a sailor had swung too, to avoid bad luck. It was a lot of work avoiding bad luck. I sat down on a bench that presented itself. The bench was white. That was to fool you so you wouldn't know if there was snow on it or not. There was. There were holes in the wrought iron seat, but the snow hadn't fallen through. I should have driven to work, but there was never any parking when I drove to work. They wouldn't let you park in the hotel's parking structure. Well, they would, but not for free. I got up and tried to walk, but it was harder. There was a story I had read in grade school about a guy with a few matches, and he hadn't been able to start a fire, and he had died in the snow. I was like that guy, only I didn't have any matches. That was how it was. You gave up smoking to save your life, but then you didn't have matches or a light, and you died of frostbite. And when they did an autopsy, your lungs were white. Down at the end of a block, a car was coming. It was a chariot, really. It was white, too, like the snow, like the bench, like the world. It was going in the right direction. It had a little bubble on top. It was probably a cab. Other cars didn't have those bubbles on them, did they? A cab would be good if I had money. Did I have money? Yes, at least $50. I stepped as close as I could to the curb without falling off and raised my hand to hail the driver. It wasn't a cab, though. It said Ann Arbor Police Department on the side. The police car stopped. The driver got out and came around toward the front of the car. He stood looking at me, not unkindly. He was dressed in blue. Maybe that was to match his eyes, which were bluer than other blues. In a world where delivery boys looked like doctors, what did policemen look like? Was he really a policeman? He was carrying a gun. Guns were another way people tried to avoid bad luck. Maybe it was wrong to try too hard to avoid bad luck. Maybe when you did that, the luck got worse. Guns were scary, but the policemen seemed nice. There had been a nice policeman when I was young. He put handcuffs on all of us and laughed when we slid our hands out. "There's no catching you, small fry," he'd say to us. "I'm going to have to throw you back." My mouth was like a drawer of jumbled clothing. I rummaged around in it until I found my voice like a pair of underwear. No, not underwear. I wasn't wearing underwear. Like socks. "You're a policeman, aren't you?" I said. My voice wasn't slurry at all. More like fuzzy. Fuzzy Wuzzy was a bear. "Yes," the man said, "I'm Officer Ferrier of the Ann Arbor Police Department. Are you all right?" His voice was odd, full of starts and stops, like one of those tapes that people make to speed up and slow down because it's funny and different. He handed me a stiff little piece of paper. "Are you giving me a ticket?" I asked, too smart to answer his question directly. "I thought you were a cab. I didn't see your uniform at first, through the glass." Officer Ferrier of Ann Arbor Police Department smiled. He had the mixed-up hair that people called salt and pepper. His face was bulldog saggy, but when he smiled, he looked nice. He had wonderful eyes, bluer than sea or sky, or anything I could think of that was blue. He looked like someone you could go home with safely. Not that I was any judge. "Have you done anything I should take you in for?" Officer Ferrier asked. "I think I'm hung over," I said. "This is only my second time, though. I was only 5 the first time. It was after Thanksgiving and I threw up. And the school nurse said, 'I think someone's had a little too much turkey, don't you?' And I said, 'No, I think someone's had a little too much champagne.' It tasted good, but there was sugar. I don't know why I'm talking so much." Officer Ferrier smiled, but his smile was wrapped around questions. "It's New Year's," he said. "You look really cold." His smile reminded me of Humphrey Bogart. He should never have let Ingrid get away. He should have handcuffed her to him when they were in Paris. I was in the back seat now. I was coming home from the ball in a police car. My fairy godmother would be nonplussed. I was holding something, a business card. It was white with blue letters. Officer Adam Ferrier, it said. He was looking at me in the rearview mirror. "Is there anything you want to tell me?" Officer Ferrier asked. "No," I said. "Not at the moment." Had there been an accident? I hurt, but I couldn't remember. I had a card in my hand. I put the card in my purse. The police car stopped and Officer Ferrier opened the door. We were in front of my apartment building. There were lions on either side of the cracked marble stairs. They'd been worn down in the middle by the traffic of lifetimes. The building bricks were the color of old mustard. They said at college only virgins could hear the marble lions roar. I hadn't heard them, but that made sense. I looked at Officer Ferrier. I suddenly understood why he was wearing a uniform, so you could tell him from the others. "You haven't been following me, have you?" I asked. He looked hurt and I rushed to do damage control. "No, of course not. My friend's friend, who's kind of old, says I have trust issues, but he's a little suspicious and he doesn't really know me. If I have such big trust issues, I don't think I'd be moving in with two guys, do you? The house used to belong to somebody with a lot of Harleys. It has a long driveway for testing motorcycles. It's not the money thing either to move, because my father died and left me enough money to keep going. I'll be there tomorrow, but I don't know how you know where I live today." The officer smiled again, but the blue of his eyes clouded over and he looked sad. He looked perpetually sad, actually. I wanted to make him a cup of tea. I would make him a cup of tea and put 2 squares of a Hershey bar in the saucer. Or maybe marshmallows. No, marshmallows were for hot chocolate. "You gave me your address so I could drive you home," he said. "That was smart of me," I said. "Do you want to come up for a drink?" I don't mean a drink. A cup of peppermint tea with Hershey squares in the saucer? I hate peppermint, but it's good for what ails you. It's a very useful drink, and I think that's important. It's more important to be useful than beautiful, I think. I plan to drink a lot of peppermint tea today. "I'm on duty," the man in blue told me. But he smiled again, which is what I'd wanted. I decided what I'd wanted all along. "Are you sure you're all right?" he said. That was funny. It was exactly what I wanted to ask him. "I'll be fine once I have a bath, and don't look back," I said, trying to put some energy, some conviction into my words for his sake. I wanted him to believe me, and people always believed you more if you put emphasis on your words. As a child who mumbled and looked at the floor a lot, I hadn't understood that. Too bad. If I hadn't always talked in a monotone, somebody might have believed me, and everything would have been different. The officer was waiting. He looked worried. I tried to think why I might not be fine, but that was a blind alley that ran smack into a wall. The bricks in the alley were the color of dried blood. I felt like throwing up. I'd had too much to drink. Way too much. I hurt. I should have known better. I was either hung over or hung out to dry. "I'll be okay now that I'm home," I said. "Everything's in boxes, but I can take a bath and lie down." He was still waiting. He seemed like someone who could wait for a long time without losing patience. What had my grandmother said? In a crisis, be polite. This seemed like a crisis somehow, even though nothing was happening. "Would you like to come in?" I asked politely. Then I surprised myself by hoping he'd say yes. The officer didn't smile. "Not now," he said. "You've got my card in your purse. If you need help, give me a call." Somebody needed to do something. I had decided to take whatever animal it was by the horns. "Could I ask you why you're waiting?" I asked. The officer nodded. "I'm waiting to see you go in," he said. I understood. He had a problem trusting people too. He didn't trust me. I had told him this was where I lived, but I had also said I was moving. Maybe he thought I didn't look like the kind of person to live here, in this large mustard-colored building with black bars on the window, guarded by apparently toothless lions. I wasn't really the kind of person to live here. Mostly old folks lived here, but I was moving. I had told him that, hadn't I? He should have believed me, but people in his line of work were probably trained to be suspicious. People in his line of work were probably naturally suspicious. My apartment key was in my purse. It was all by itself. "I don't have a key to the outside door," I told the officer. "I think I already turned it in." "The door is open," he said. "How do you know?" "I just tried it." "What about your apartment door?" "What about it? Will you be able to get in your apartment without a key?" The officer was standing with his feet apart. He looked planted in the sidewalk, or at least taped to it. When he started to walk, he would pick up giant hunks of concrete and carry them with him, cement shoes. Wasn't that what they said about the dead gangsters they threw in the river? That was ridiculous. Nobody threw dead gangsters in the Huron River. It wasn't deep enough. A key. He had asked me about a key. "I have an apartment key," I told the officer. "You don't have to be suspicious. See, here it is. I painted it red with nail polish. I have an inner key, but not an outer key somehow." "No, wait. Even the outer key is here. It's just on a separate ring for some reason. I didn't turn it in at all. I'll be fine. Who wouldn't be fine with 2 keys? Officer Ferrier frowned. "You go on up," he said. "I'll wait down here. When you're in your apartment, I want you to wave and let me know you're all right, okay?" "Waving is definitely okay," I told him. The elevator in the lobby was waiting for me like an open mouth. I took the stairs because they could be done one by one. Stairs let you change your mind at any point. You didn't have to commit yourself. My apartment door didn't want to accept the key. At first, I thought they'd already changed the lock. Finally, it opened. I put the key back in my purse but didn't even try to close it and stepped inside. I locked the door behind me. The room was empty except for my boxes and David's bird tracks picture, which was lying on the floor unswaddled and unpacked. I had the feeling I was missing something, but I often had that feeling. That feeling was an integral part of who I was. It was necessary. I closed the door of the apartment behind me and dumped the contents of my purse on a box. Pen, wallet with a clutch of plastic cards and some small bills, my driver's license, a small red plastic comb, Officer Ferrier's card, some change, a $50 bill. But I was not wearing underwear, and the jeans I had on weren't mine. They could never have been mine. They were much too long. They were lined with flannel. There was something I was supposed to do. I couldn't remember what it was. I went to the window and looked out. It was starting to snow again, big, wet flakes. David said where he came from in Texas, a blizzard was where the snow didn't melt before it hit the ground. Down on the street, a man dressed in blue stood by a white car. Officer Ferrier. I had forgotten about him. After a moment, he looked up. I waved. He waved back. He stood for a moment by his car. I wondered if he was waiting for me to buzz him up. Then he got in his car and drove off. I was a little disappointed, but I told myself it was just as well. He looked like a nice guy, though. I started to shiver. My coat. That's what was missing. I had left work. I had walked home in the snow without my coat or my hat or my mittens. My grandmother's ghost would be very disapproving. No wonder I was shivering. I went into the bathroom. I ran the water for a hot bath. Then I sat on the toilet for a long time, breathing in the steam and waiting to pee. The bath was almost full before I was able to do anything. My pee came in a painful thread at first, and then a stinging stream. They said astronauts had such good filtering devices they could drink their urine. When I was finished peeing, I stood up. The thought of anything of substance against any part of me was unthinkable. Maybe I could dry myself off with the hairdryer, but I didn't know where it was. I shook myself, then turned off the bath water. I stood just inside the bathroom door and took off my clothing. I put the gold top in the wastebasket. What would I say if they asked? I would think of something. My fingers were thick and clumsy with cold. "Happy New Year," I told the face in the mirror over the sink when I was finally naked. The face in the mirror swung forward, offering the same advice she always did. "Don't look back." "You're the one looking back," I told her. Looking past the face deep into the slantwise mirror, I caught a glimpse of my small, knotty pine dresser. Next to it, shoulder to shoulder, like stalwart comrades-at-arms, stood my 3 moving boxes. One was marked shoes and clothing, the second books, the third more books, plus hairdryer. Someone had wanted the hairdryer. I stepped in the bathtub. Good, but the heat of the water made red stockings on my legs, and when I started to lower myself, the water scalded me. I howled. I sat on the edge of the tub and ran cold water. When the water was the same temperature as I was, I eased myself in and leaned back against the white tiles, liking the feel of that against my head and shoulders. But my right hand kept creeping along the wall, forward and back, completely independent of me, dragging my right arm with it. It occurred to me that I might be on the verge of a breakdown. The thought was a little alarming. I was cold. I was freezing, actually, but I couldn't stand the heat. I didn't have the heart to thoroughly clean myself. I just lay there and felt warmth come crawling back to me, like an animal who'd done wrong and was afraid you wouldn't forgive it. When the water got cold, I stood, pulling myself up by the towel rack. Half of the towel rack came out of the wall, and the towel fell into the bathtub and got wet. I stepped gingerly out of the bath and used a washcloth to dry off. I pulled my last unpacked t-shirt and my last pair of unpacked slacks out of the knotty pine dresser and put them on. Luckily, they were soft. Then I kicked the jeans that lay discarded by the tub until they were out in the living room. Let sleeping dogs lie. Only they didn't look like a dog as much as the discarded skin of a huge blue snake. I steered my way across the now trackless living room, avoiding the jeans, and crawled into bed under the single sheet. I closed my eyes. A white shirt, well starched, dangled over my mother's red shoes. An umbrella, black and leaning. Fear, then pain. It wasn't until I reached to pull down the window shade on my bed that I saw it. Scrawled on my right palm in marker, savage in its thickness, was a red G. There was nothing on the other palm. What did G stand for? God? How did it get there? I was exhausted, but I had to get the G off. The letter made my palm burn. I'd been caught red-handed. A was adultery. What was G? G movies were general, as in public. I spit into my hands and rubbed them together hard. Maybe I would start a fire. I rubbed some more. Spit, rub, spit, rub. My whole palm was faintly red. The G was a little dimmer. There had been that story in high school about a scientist who found a potion to eliminate his wife's ugly birthmark, killing her in the process. High school had been full of stories with unhappy endings. Now I licked my palm, remembering happy hours tucked into difficult days, hours of cherry popsicles and stick out your tongue. My palm tasted brackish and salty, like bad champagne. I got up and went to the bathroom. I was having trouble moving. I arrived at the bathroom. Leaning on the sink with one hand, I opened the cabinet, but there was nothing behind the mirror anymore. All traces of me were gone. I thought for a moment I was going to fall over. Using the edge of the sink counter, I lowered myself to the floor. I remembered something. I opened up the cabinet under the sink. There was a can of Comet. I reached in and shook the Comet on my palm. As a first grader, I'd swallowed bunches of this once, trying to clean myself from the inside out. I poured some Comet on my palms and tried to spit on the heap of blue sand. My mouth was dry. I pivoted and pulled myself over to the bathtub. The faucet was trickling as always. You could never shut those things completely off. That was good this time. I let a few drops fall into my palm and I made a witch's paste, a blue paste to rub out a red spot. I rubbed and the G got fainter, and my hands were blue and smelled as though I were living underwater in a world of chlorine. I rubbed, and the G faded until it was only a hint, a suggestion. For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. The psychic had grabbed my hand and I had said no, but David and Raitlin laughed and pushed me forward, and the psychic looked sad and shook her head and gave me a hug and wouldn't take any money and closed her booth right after that. I made it back to the bedroom, but for a moment I couldn't make myself touch the bed. The covers were all mounded up, and it was as though someone were under them, someone unable to move. I pulled the covers off, and like the space behind the mirror, there was nothing there. Nothing at all. I fell asleep, trying to block out the dream I didn't want by remembering experiments in color. They wrote the word yellow in blue marker, and they asked people to say the color of the writing. And people had trouble saying the color instead of the name. If green was written in red, you would say green because that's what the world told you. The dream happened anyway. A man and I were riding somewhere fast, side by side, and I didn't know where he was taking me except away from home. It was a cold fall day. The trees we were riding under had no leaves. They were like thin black skeletons, waving stubby arms stiffly as if signaling us to stop. I was riding bareback on a strange horse, holding a baby in the crook of one arm. I was naked, and so was the baby. We were both covered with white. I was having trouble reining in my horse with one hand. I could feel the horse's hair, and under that its bones pressing up sharply between my legs. I must have been holding the baby too tightly, because it squirted out of my grasp and fell into a ditch of dirty water. I stopped my horse and slid to the ground. The man stopped too. I began to tell the man that what had happened wasn't my fault. I was shivering because I didn't have any clothes to wear, I said. The horse was hard to ride. The man was going too fast. I didn't know the way. The baby had been squirming. After I explained myself, I picked up the baby. The baby was cold and gray, and the blue tracings on its limbs, like rivers on a map, let me know it was dead. The baby squirting out of my arms and landing in a ditch, the water, the man, the horse, the weather, None of those had killed the baby. What had killed the baby were my explanations. I decided in the dream I would call Officer Ferrier and turn myself in. If I did time, I might feel better.